Alien invasion plans. In the depths of the Andromeda Galaxy, the Zoraxian High Council convened to discuss a matter of utmost importance: the invasion of a distant blue planet known as Earth. Emperor Zargox, a fierce warrior with a dozen tentacles and eyes that glowed like supernovas, slammed his appendage on the obsidian table. "The time has come," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the cavernous chamber. "For too long, we have ignored the potential threat of this primitive world. But no more. We shall conquer Earth and add it to our glorious empire." The council members chattered excitedly, their various appendages twitching with anticipation. One of them, a spindly creature named Xyloth, raised a cautious tentacle. "But my liege," he said, his voice quivering slightly, "what do we actually know about this Earth? Surely we should gather more intelligence before launching an invasion." Zargox fixed Xyloth with a withering stare, his eyes pulsing with barely contained rage. "You dare question my decision?" he roared, causing Xyloth to shrink back in fear. "Earth is a backwater planet, its inhabitants still divided into primitive nation-states and reliant on fossil fuels. They will be no match for our superior technology and intellect." But Xyloth, though terrified, persisted. "My lord, I meant no disrespect. I merely suggest that we send scouts to observe the humans more closely. We should understand our enemy before engaging them in battle." Zargox considered this for a moment, his tentacles writhing thoughtfully. "Very well," he conceded, his voice dripping with disdain. "We shall send a scouting party to Earth. But mark my words, Xyloth, if they find any indication that the humans pose a threat, we will not hesitate to strike." And so, a small scout ship set out from the Zoraxian homeworld, its destination the distant blue marble known as Earth. Aboard were Xyloth and his partner, Curates, a burly creature with scales like armor and eyes that could see in infrared. As they approached Earth's orbit, Curates turned to Xyloth, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I can't wait to see these puny humans up close," he chuckled, flexing his muscular appendages. "I bet they'll run screaming at the mere sight of us." Xyloth, ever the cautious one, frowned at his partner's bravado. "We must be careful, Curates. We know little about this world or its inhabitants. Our mission is to observe and report back, not engage in any unnecessary confrontations." Curates scoffed, his scales rattling with contempt. "You worry too much, Xyloth. These humans are primitives. What could they possibly do to us? Oh, if only they knew what awaited them on the surface below." For little did these alien scouts realize they were about to encounter a human who would shatter every preconception they had about this seemingly backwater world. As their scout ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, cloaked from human detection, Xyloth and Curates scanned the planet's surface for a suitable landing site. They settled on a remote forest region, far from any human settlements. With a soft thud, their vessel touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering evergreens. Xyloth and Curates emerged from their ship, their alien forms shimmering into invisibility as they activated their camouflage technology. Curates inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring as he sampled Earth's unfamiliar scents. "Bug, this planet reeks of biological life," he grumbled, his face contorting in disgust. "I can't wait to be done with this mission and return to the sterile perfection of our homeworld." Xyloth, meanwhile, was busy scanning their surroundings with a handheld device, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These readings are strange," he muttered, tapping the screen with a slender tentacle. "The biosphere here is incredibly diverse and complex. We must be cautious as we proceed." And so, the two alien scouts set out into the wilderness, their invisible forms moving silently through the dense underbrush. Little did they know that they were being watched, not by humans, but by a creature far more ancient and primal. For deep in the forest, a massive grizzly bear had caught the scent of these alien intruders, and it was not happy. Scout mission gone awry. As Xyloth and Curates ventured deeper into the forest, the eerie silence began to unnerve them. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind and the soft crunch of their invisible footsteps on the forest floor. Towering trees loomed over them, their gnarled branches reaching out like twisted claws. Shafts of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, creating a dappled pattern of light and shadow that seemed to shift and change with every step. Xyloth paused, his head cocked to one side as he listened intently. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, his voice tinged with unease. Curates, who had been casually scanning the area with his infrared vision, shrugged his massive shoulders. "I don't hear anything." "Exactly," Xyloth replied, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. "No bird calls, no insect chirps. It's too quiet." Curates chuckled, his deep voice echoing through the stillness. "You're being paranoid, Xyloth. This is a primitive world, remember. The creatures here probably fled in terror at the mere sight of our ship." But Xyloth wasn't convinced. He had a sinking feeling that they were being watched, stalked by something ancient and primal. He shivered despite the warm air, his tentacles twitching with apprehension. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the distance, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the eerie silence. Xyloth and Curates froze, their invisible forms tensing with anticipation. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Xyloth saw a massive shape moving through the trees, its fur a shaggy brown and its eyes glinting with a fierce intelligence. "Curates," he hissed, his voice trembling with fear. "We need to leave. Now." But Curates, ever the brave warrior, merely scoffed at his partner's cowardice. "Relax, Xyloth. It's just some dumb earth animal. What could it possibly do to us?" Famous last words. As if in answer to Curates' dismissive comment, the creature emerged from the shadows, revealing itself to be an enormous grizzly bear. It reared up on its hind legs, towering over the invisible aliens, its eyes scanning the clearing with a predatory intensity. Xyloth felt his heart skip a beat as he realized the bear was looking directly at them, its gaze piercing through their cloaking technology as if it could sense their alien presence. For a moment, the three beings stood frozen in a tense tableau, the two technologically advanced aliens and the primal force of nature that was the grizzly. The bear let out a low, rumbling growl, its hot breath misting in the cool air. Curates, for once, seemed at a loss for words, his usually cocky demeanor replaced by a look of genuine fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear turned and lumbered off into the forest, leaving Xyloth and Curates trembling in its wake. Xyloth let out a shaky breath, his entire body sagging with relief. "That was too close," he muttered, his voice still quivering with adrenaline. "We need to be more careful. This world is not as primitive as we thought." Curates, to his credit, had the grace to look sheepish. "Maybe you're right, Xyloth. That creature, it was like it could see right through us, like it knew we didn't belong here." Xyloth nodded, his mind racing with the implications of their encounter. If a simple earth animal could sense their presence, what hope did they have of remaining undetected by the humans? And more importantly, what other primal forces lurked in the depths of this alien world, waiting to be unleashed? Little did they know, their troubles were only just beginning. As they pressed deeper into the wilderness, the forest seemed to grow more menacing with each passing step. The trees closed in around them, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out the sun. Strange noises echoed in the distance, the howl of an unseen predator, the creaking of ancient wood, the skittering of countless unseen insects. Xyloth felt his skin crawl with each new sound, his tentacles twitching with a sense of primordial dread. Even Curates seemed on edge, his usual bravado replaced by a wary vigilance as he scanned the shadows for any sign of threat. And then, just as they were starting to think they had left the bear far behind, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of something large and heavy crashing through the underbrush, drawing closer with each passing second. Xyloth and Curates exchanged a look of pure terror, realizing too late that they had stumbled into the grizzly's territory. The bear burst into the clearing with a roar that shook the very earth, its massive bulk barreling towards them like a furry freight train. Curates let out a high-pitched scream, his composure shattering like glass as he turned to flee. But Xyloth, paralyzed by fear, could only watch in horror as the bear closed in, its jaws gaping wide to reveal rows of gleaming teeth. Clash of the Titans. Time seemed to slow down as the grizzly bear charged towards Xyloth and Curates, its massive paws pounding the earth like thunder. Curates' scream cut through the air, his terror palpable as he scrambled to get away. But Xyloth, still paralyzed by fear, could only watch as the bear closed in, its hot breath fogging the air, and its eyes glinting with a primal fury. Just as the bear was about to reach them, a deafening crack rang out through the forest. The bear stumbled, roaring in pain and confusion as a spray of red bloomed across its shaggy flank. Xyloth and Curates whirled around to see a human man striding into the clearing, a smoking rifle clutched in his hands. He was a rugged specimen, with a weathered face, piercing blue eyes, and a beard that looked like it had been sculpted from steel wool. He wore a battered leather jacket and mud-spattered boots, and there was a coiled intensity to his movements that spoke of a lifetime spent grappling with the untamed wilderness. "Gus McClintock," he said by way of introduction, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Looks like you boys picked the wrong neck of the woods to go sightseeing in." Xyloth and Curates could only stare in mute astonishment as Gus calmly reloaded his rifle, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was facing down a creature that could disembowel him with a single swipe of its claws. The bear, enraged by its wound, let out a roar that shook the leaves from the trees and charged at Gus with a speed that belied its massive size. What happened next would be forever seared into the aliens' minds as a testament to the sheer audacity and indomitable spirit of the human race. Gus, rather than fleeing or firing another shot, tossed his rifle aside and stepped forward to meet the bear head-on. He let out a bellowing war cry, his voice echoing through the forest, like the primal scream of some ancient warrior. As the bear reared up on its hind legs, cowering over him like a furry mountain, Gus lunged forward and tackled it around the waist, his arms locking around its thick torso in a bear hug that was as much a challenge as it was an embrace. The two titans crashed to the ground in a whirling maelstrom of fur, flesh, and flying debris. They rolled across the clearing in a dizzying blur of motion, the bear's claws raking across Gus's back and drawing blood, but the man refused to let go. He grappled with the creature in a display of raw strength and tenacity that left Xyloth and Curates slack-jawed with awe. Gus hammer-fisted the bear's snout, deftly sidestepping and countering every slashing attack. The creature bellowed in pain and outrage, shaking its head dazedly as blood streamed from its nostrils. But Gus never let up, bobbing, weaving, always keeping the pressure on, never giving the bear an inch. Xyloth tracked the brawl through his scanner, reeling at the biometric readings. This Gus's adrenaline levels were spiking beyond anything in the Zoraxian database, his pain receptors all but shutting down as he channeled every ounce of strength and focus into the fight. It was like watching a being transcend its biological limitations through sheer force of will. In a final, desperate gambit, the bear wrapped Gus in a crushing embrace, its claws digging deep into his flesh as it tried to suffocate him. But Gus, his face purple and his eyes bulging, somehow managed to snake his arms up and lock his hands around the bear's throat. He squeezed with all his might, his biceps bulging like boulders, and the bear let out a strangled whine as its windpipe started to collapse. The two combatants remained locked together in that deadly embrace, straining with every fiber of their being, poised on the knife edge between life and death. And then, incredibly, the bear's struggles began to weaken. Its grip loosened, its eyes rolling back in its head as Gus's chokehold inexorably cut off its air supply. With a final, shuddering gasp, the mighty grizzly went limp, its massive body slumping to the ground in a lifeless heap. Gus staggered to his feet, his chest heaving and his body striped with blood. Some of it the bear's, much of it his own. He stood over his fallen adversary, a primal god of the forest, his eyes blazing with the light of victory. And as Xyloth and Curates watched in stupefied silence, he threw back his head and let out a triumphant roar that echoed to the very vault of the heavens. In that moment, the two aliens realized they had made a grave error in underestimating this world and its inhabitants. If one human could face down an apex predator with nothing but his wits and raw strength, what chance did the Zoraxian Empire have against an entire planet of these tenacious, indomitable beings? Alien perspectives transformed. In the stunned silence that followed Gus's triumphant roar, Xyloth and Curates could only stare at the human in slack-jawed disbelief. Their minds reeled as they tried to process the impossible scene they had just witnessed. A lone primitive biped had just bested one of this savage planet's apex predators in single combat, armed with nothing but his bare hands and sheer indomitable will. Curates was the first to find his voice, though it emerged as a strangled croak. Did that just happen? He stammered, his normally vibrant scales a sickly gray. Did a human just beat a bear in a fistfight? Xyloth could only nod mutely, his scanner forgotten in his trembling appendage. His vast intellect, normally so quick and incisive, felt like it was mired in a fog of shock and burgeoning dread. Dimly, he registered Gus retrieving his rifle and striding off into the forest, leaving the aliens to their existential crisis. "We're doomed," Curates whispered, his voice hollow with despair. "If all humans are like that, we don't stand a chance. They'll tear through our invasion force like tissue paper." Xyloth wanted to offer a word of comfort, a glimmer of hope, but he found none. His mind kept replaying the titanic clash they had witnessed, Gus's snarling visage etched into his memory like a nightmare. How could they have been so arrogant, so foolish, as to think they could conquer a world that bred warriors of such unfathomable ferocity? "We have to report this to the High Council," he said at last, his voice leaden with grim resolve. "They have to know what we're truly up against. If we proceed with the invasion now, it will be a slaughter." Curates gave a shudder that rippled through his luminous scales. "They won't believe us," he said, a note of hysteria creeping into his voice. "They'll think we've lost our minds. I mean, who in their right mind would believe that a primitive ape could wrestle a monster like that into submission? It's insanity." Xyloth couldn't help but agree. The sheer absurdity of what they had seen defied all logic, all reason. And yet the proof was there before them, in the hulking, motionless form of the vanquished bear. They had underestimated the humans in the most catastrophic way possible, and now their entire species might pay the price for their hubris. "We have to try," he said grimly. "The fate of our civilization hangs in the balance. If we don't convince the High Council to call off the invasion, we may be dooming the Zoraxian Empire to a fate worse than any we have ever known." With heavy hearts and minds buzzing with the enormity of their discovery, Xyloth and Curates made their way back to their ship. As they prepared for the journey home, they couldn't help but cast nervous glances at the surrounding forest, half expecting to see Gus or another human warrior burst from the underbrush at any moment. It was a tense and jittery voyage back to the Zoraxian homeworld, the two scouts jumping at every shadow and startling at every sound. They were all too aware that they carried with them a truth that could shatter their society's very foundations, the knowledge that they were not the apex predators of the galaxy they had once believed themselves to be. When they finally stood before the High Council, their report was met with a stunned and disbelieving silence. As Xyloth and Curates recounted the details of Gus's battle with the bear, they could see the dawning horror and disbelief on their leaders' faces, mirroring their own when they had witnessed the event firsthand. This cannot be," Emperor Zargox whispered, his regal bearing crumbling in the face of this shattering revelation. "A primitive ape besting a monster in hand-to-hand combat. It defies all reason." But the evidence was undeniable. The biometric data from Xyloth's scanner, the vivid holo-recordings of the fight, the haunted, shell-shocked expressions on the scouts' faces, all of it pointed to a single, inescapable truth. The humans were not the weak, helpless prey they had once imagined them to be. They were something else entirely, something fierce and primal and utterly indomitable. As the reality of their situation sank in, a grim pall fell over the High Council chamber. The once unassailable confidence of the Zoraxian leadership had been shaken to its core, replaced by a gnawing doubt and an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. They had come to this meeting prepared to finalize the details of their glorious conquest of Earth. But now, faced with the specter of a planet full of bear-wrestling savages, their grand ambitions turned to ash in their mouths. There was only one question on everyone's lips, hanging in the air like a looming specter. What were they going to do now? Change of plans. In the sprawling halls of the Zoraxian High Council, a fierce debate raged. The Emperor's advisors, military leaders, and scientific minds were locked in a desperate struggle to chart a path forward in the wake of Xyloth and Curates' shattering revelation. The once unassailable confidence in their supremacy had been rocked to its core, and now they faced a choice that would determine the fate of their empire. We must press forward with the invasion. Admiral Zorgax, the leader of the Zoraxian war machine, pounded the table with a massive armored fist. To turn back now would be an unforgivable show of weakness. We would lose all credibility as a galactic power. And what good is credibility if we're all dead? Countered Xylar, the chief scientist. His normally placid face was drawn with worry, his tendrils twitching in agitation. You saw the footage of that human warrior. If even a fraction of their population is capable of such feats, we wouldn't stand a chance in an open conflict. The debate raged back and forth, each side presenting increasingly dire scenarios. Some argued that the humans' primitive technology would be no match for their advanced weaponry, that they could simply bombard the planet from orbit until all resistance was crushed. Others pointed out the logistical nightmare of trying to occupy a world where even the wildlife was deadly enough to give their greatest warriors pause. Through it all, Emperor Zargox sat in brooding silence, his regal features etched with the weight of his impending decision. He had come into this council meeting ready to give the order to begin the invasion, to finally claim the Earth and its resources for the glory of the Zoraxian Empire. But now, faced with the specter of a planet full of bear-wrestling primitives, he felt the icy grip of doubt clutching at his heart. What if we're wrong? He said at last, his voice cutting through the clamor like a blade. What if the humans are not the weak, divided prey we thought them to be? What if, by invading their world, we are unleashing a monster beyond our darkest imaginings? A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the councilors pondered their emperor's words. They had all seen the footage of Gus's titanic battle with the bear, had all felt the cold shock of realizing just how badly they had underestimated the humans. Could they really risk the fate of their entire civilization on the assumption that this was an isolated incident, that the rest of humanity would be any easier to conquer? Your Majesty, Xyloth spoke up, his voice still haunted by the memory of what he had witnessed on Earth. If I may, I don't believe we can afford to take that chance. The humans, they're not like any species we've encountered before. They have a strength, a resilience, that defies all our understanding. To try to subjugate them, it would be like trying to tame a supernova. Carax nodded in grim agreement, his scales still ashen from the horror of Gus's battle. We came to Earth thinking we would be the predators, he said softly. But now I fear we would be little more than prey. Emperor Zargox closed his eyes, the weight of his empire's fate pressing down on him like a physical burden. He thought of the countless conquests that had built the Zoraxian Empire, the innumerable species they had subjugated and enslaved in their relentless expansion across the stars. Never before had they faced a foe that gave them such pause, that made them question the very foundations of their civilization. But as much as it galled him to admit it, he knew that Xyloth and Carax were right. To proceed with the invasion now, knowing what they knew about the humans' terrifying capabilities, would be to court disaster on an unimaginable scale. It would be throwing away the lives of countless Zoraxian warriors in a potentially futile bid for a prize that might well prove to be poisoned. "We will not invade," he said at last, each word feeling like it was being dragged out of him. "The risk? It is too great. We cannot afford to gamble our empire's future on a species we so gravely underestimated. As of this moment, the Earth is off limits. No Zoraxian will set foot on that accursed planet, on pain of death." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the council chamber erupted into chaos. There were cries of relief from some, howls of outrage from others. Admiral Zorgax looked like he was on the verge of apoplexy, his face darkening to a wrathful crimson. But Emperor Zargox held up a hand for silence, and gradually the tumult died away. "This is not a decision I make lightly," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. "But in light of what we have learned, it is the only sane choice. The Earth, it is a mystery, a danger beyond our reckoning. Perhaps one day, when we have grown in wisdom and understanding, we may revisit the question of contact with the humans. But for now, we will leave them be, and pray to the stars that they never turn their terrible gaze upon us." And so it was decreed. The Zoraxian invasion of Earth, the grand ambition that had consumed their civilization for so long, was no more. In its place was a grim resolve, a determination to fortify their own borders and turn their attentions to safer, more tractable frontiers. The specter of humanity, of the Deathworlders who could battle monsters with their bare hands, would haunt the Zoraxian psyche for generations to come, a reminder of the dangers of hubris and the folly of underestimating the unknown. Earthly oblivion. Gus McClintock sat on his porch, nursing a beer and watching the sun dip below the tree line. The cuts and bruises from his tussle with the bear were starting to heal, fading into just another set of scars in a lifetime of close calls. He felt a twinge in his ribs as he shifted in his seat, a reminder of the crushing force of the grizzly's embrace. It had been one hell of a fight, even by Gus's standards. There had been a moment, as he'd stared into those pitiless black eyes, when he'd wondered if he might have finally bitten off more than he could chew. But in the end, his stubbornness and grit had won out, just like they always did. The bear had been tough, but Gus was tougher. He took a swig of his beer, savoring the cool bite of the hops. All in all, it had been just another day in the life of Gus McClintock, wilderness survivor extraordinaire. He'd tangled with nature, looked death in the face, and come out the other side with a new story to tell. Just business as usual for a man who'd made a life out of pitting himself against the untamed wilds. Little did Gus know, his latest adventure had had repercussions far beyond anything he could imagine. Light years away, an entire alien civilization was still reeling from the aftermath of his encounter with the bear, their grand ambitions of conquest shattered by the terrifying specter of humanity's ferocious tenacity. But for Gus, life went on as it always had. There were traps to check, game to hunt, and a rugged patch of Montana wilderness to call his own. The wider universe, with its galactic empires and star-spanning intrigues, was as distant and unknowable to him as the surface of the moon. And yet, in some strange way, Gus and the Zoraxians were now inextricably linked, two disparate threads woven into the vast tapestry of the cosmos. The Deathworlder and the would-be conquerors, each a mystery to the other, their fates forever altered by a chance encounter in the depths of an alien wood. As the last light faded from the sky, and the stars began to wink into view, Gus heaved himself out of his chair with a grunt. There was a chill in the air, a hint of the coming winter, and he had wood to chop and meat to smoke. The bear had been a worthy adversary, but there would be other fights, other challenges to overcome. That was the way of things, in the wilderness and in life. He turned to go inside, his mind already on the tasks ahead. Behind him, the night sky stretched out in an endless expanse, a billion stars glittering in the void. Out there, in the vast reaches of space, the Zoraxians huddled in their ships and fortresses, watching and waiting, forever wary of the death world that had so confounded their ambitions. But Gus knew nothing of this, and would never know. For him, the universe began and ended at the edges of his little patch of woods, in the simple, timeless rhythms of the natural world. Whatever lay beyond that was someone else's concern, a mystery for minds far vaster and more far-seeing than his own. And so life went on Earth and in the stars, the two realms separated by an unfathomable gulf of understanding and experience. But for one brief, shining moment, they had intersected, a man and a bear unwittingly changing the course of galactic history. It was a story that would never be told, a secret buried in the depths of an alien forest. But perhaps that was as it should be. For in the end, what did it matter if the deeds of one man went unsung and unremembered? Gus had lived as he had always lived, by his own strength and wits and indomitable will. And in a universe vast beyond reckoning, full of wonders and terrors beyond imagining, perhaps that was the greatest achievement of all, the truest measure of the human spirit. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and inscrutable, and Gus McClintock went inside to sharpen his knives and stoke the fire. And in that small, simple act, the whole of the cosmos found its balance once more, a Deathworlder and a distant empire each finding their place in the grand, unfolding dance of existence.